I never expected to have a problem with Diane Miller, the president of our Homeowners Association, HOA. Living in Sunnyside Estates was a dream when I moved in 3 years ago. The neighborhood was beautiful, with neatly kept lawns and matching mailboxes. But behind that perfect look, Diane, the HOA president, ruled with an iron fist. My first run-in with Diane happened soon after I moved in. I made the mistake of planting purple petunias instead of the red ones that were approved. She left a notice on my door, saying it didn't fit the neighborhood's rules. I changed the flowers, thinking it wasn't worth the trouble. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of her control over my life. Fast forward to the hottest summer on record. The temperatures had been in the high 90s for weeks. As a software engineer working from home, I relied on air conditioning to keep my workspace cool. More importantly, my father, who had recently moved in with me after heart surgery, needed the air conditioning for his health. His doctor had warned that extreme heat could make his condition worse. One Tuesday afternoon, during a video meeting, I noticed the house was getting warmer. I checked the thermostat. It was off. That was strange since I had just had the system serviced the week before. I excused myself from my meeting and went outside to check the unit. That's when I saw Diane standing there, holding a padlock. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though I was angry. She didn't seem embarrassed at all. "Your air conditioning unit doesn't follow HOA rules," she said with a smug look. "It wasn't approved by the board." I took a deep breath. This is the same unit I've had for 3 years. I just had it serviced last week. "Well, the technician must have changed it, and now it needs to be approved at our next meeting," she said, locking the unit's electrical disconnect. "You can't do this. My father is inside, and he has a heart condition. He needs the air conditioning," I explained, feeling more concerned. Diane just rolled her eyes. "Everyone has an excuse. Rules are rules," she said. "You can file an emergency appeal, but the board won't meet until Friday." She handed me a violation notice and walked away. I called the HOA management company right away, explaining the situation. They seemed sorry but said they couldn't override the president without a meeting. I mentioned my father's health, but they just suggested I find somewhere else to stay until the issue was fixed. By then, the house was getting really hot. My father insisted he was fine, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. I set up fans and gave him cool compresses, but with the outside temperature nearing 100 degrees, it was hard to keep up. That evening, I called my neighbor Tom, a retired electrician. He came over, checked the padlock, and said, "This is ridiculous and dangerous. Your father's health is at risk." I asked if there was anything he could do. "Legally, I can't remove the lock," he said, "but this lock is wrong. Diane had no right to put it on your property without proper notice." That gave me an idea. I thanked Tom and went inside to do some research. I stayed up late reading through the HOA rules and state laws. By morning, I had a plan. First, I documented everything: photos of the padlock, the air conditioning unit, the temperature inside the house, my father's condition, and everything I had said to Diane. I even got a letter from my father's doctor saying that extreme heat could harm him. Next, I called a lawyer friend who knew property law. She confirmed what I had suspected: Diane had gone too far. In our state, cutting off essential services like air conditioning could be considered harassment, or even elder abuse, given my father's condition. Armed with all this information, I decided to fight back using Diane's own rules. I filed an official complaint. I sent a letter to every member of the HOA board, pointing out the rules Diane had broken. She failed to give proper notice, went onto private property without permission, and put a resident's health at risk. But I didn't stop there. I also called the local building inspector, who told me that tampering with heating and air conditioning systems without approval was against the rules. He agreed to come over that afternoon. By noon, my father started showing signs of heat exhaustion. His face was red, and he seemed confused. I immediately called 911. The paramedics arrived quickly, realized how serious the situation was, and treated my father on the spot. They even made a note that the heat in the house made his condition worse. One of the paramedics asked how the house got so hot, so I explained about the locked air conditioner. They looked at each other, and one of them said, "This could be considered endangering an elderly person's life. Do you want us to call the police?" I agreed. It had gone too far. The police showed up soon after. I told them everything again, and they took photos of the padlock, the notice from the HOA, and my father's medical records. Then they asked if I knew where Diane lived. Of course I did. Everyone knew her house with its perfectly trimmed hedges and beautiful roses. I watched as two officers walked up to her door. She opened it, looking annoyed, until she saw who it was. From across the street, I saw her expression change from anger to confusion. The officers spoke with her for a while, and I saw her point in my direction many times. Finally, one of the officers took out a notepad, and that seemed to make her really upset. I could hear her yelling across the street, saying, "I'm just enforcing the rules that everyone agreed to follow." Meanwhile, the building inspector had arrived at my house. He checked the air conditioning unit and the padlock, taking notes and pictures. He confirmed that the unit was up to code and that the padlock was not allowed. He said he would report the HOA for the violation. To my surprise, the officers came back with Diane. Though she wasn't in handcuffs, she clearly wasn't happy. One of the officers came up to me and said, "We need to remove this illegal lock to turn your air conditioning back on, especially since your father's health is at risk. Diane won't give us the key, saying it's HOA property. Do we have your permission to cut it off?" I said absolutely, while keeping my eyes on Diane, who was fuming. "You can't do this," she yelled as the officer used bolt cutters to remove the padlock. "This is HOA property. He's breaking the rules, and I'll report all of you." The officer calmly told her, "Ma'am, please lower your voice. We've explained the situation. You had no right to disable this unit, especially after knowing about the medical need." Once the lock was removed, Tom helped me get the air conditioning working again. The cool air started flowing, and I felt a huge relief. My father would be okay. But the story wasn't over. The officers talked to Diane again, this time more seriously. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like reckless endangerment and elder abuse charges. Diane's face turned pale. To my surprise, they actually put her in handcuffs. As they led her to the police car, she looked at me with a mix of shock and anger. "This isn't over," she shouted. "The board will hear about this." The next day, I got a call from the HOA vice president, who apologized. They had called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Diane from her position. They were making new rules to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. 3 weeks later, Diane's case went to court. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, a $5,000 fine, and 200 hours of community service, specifically working with organizations that care for the elderly. As the judge announced the sentence, Diane's face crumbled in disbelief. Her carefully controlled image finally cracked under the weight of the real consequences.